Ghost of Tsushima was alright. Pretty good. Why do I say it like that? Because every review I've seen of this game just has nothing but glowing praise. Swan song of the PS4, they say. Phenomenal open world, they say. Yeah, I play a game that bored me faster than an Assassin's Creed game, and that's saying a lot. Okay, bit of an over-exaggeration, but still. I just don't see what's so special about this game. What was so amazing about it. Why it won Player Choice Award. Why it's considered one of the best games to come out in 2020 in a year that I think was pretty damn good for gaming. Like, what are the worst games we got this year? Resident Evil 3 Remake, Last of Us Part 2, and Cyberpunk. Still all pretty damn good games. I mean, Resident Evil 3 not so much, but the other two I'd fuck with. So I'm just going to try to explain why I didn't think this game to be as amazing as everyone else thinks it is. But let's take things one at a time, starting with the open world design. Open world games are a tricky genre for me. I'm not just a fan of having a giant open world just for the sake of it. You know, there are 3 ways to make an open world game fun, or I guess in this case to justify having an open world. As long as a game hits one of these 3, I am usually fine. The first one is simple. Have movement mechanics that require a huge space to use them in the first place. This would be games like Gravity Rush, Dying Light, even Sucker Punch's last IP, Infamous. Holy fuck do I love Infamous. For obvious reasons, had these games not been open world, the movement systems would be a lot less fun, and hence the games would be a lot less fun. And for even more obvious reasons, Ghost of Tsushima does not have this. The intention here is pretty clear. You're not some kind of superhero or god who can just fly through the city. This is medieval Japan. The fastest mode of travel they had was horses. What do you expect? This takes us to the second form of open world, Sandbox, a playground mixed with AI, tools, and other mechanics for the player to just mess around with and have fun and create spontaneous, weird moments. This would be stuff like Grand Theft Auto, Saints Row 2, Red Dead Redemption, Metal Gear Solid 5 to an extent. Tsushima doesn't do this either. Again, what was I expecting, right? This clearly isn't trying to be that type of game. It doesn't have to. So what's the third category? I call it the lived-in world. And no, I'm not referring to shit like what was promised with Cyberpunk with the whole 1,000 NPCs with their own daily routines, like we ever fucking needed that in a video game. Point is that this is, I don't know, how can I explain it? This is the type of open world that gets often associated with RPGs, but whether or not it's an RPG is irrelevant. They're just games that make you feel like participants in a world through a combination of character choices, or an active economy, mini games, or interesting side quests, instead of some character who just moves through it, checking shit off of a list. These are games like Witcher, Oblivion, to a lesser extent Yakuza, because it's technically not an open world, but it is better than most open world games. Unfortunately, I think Tsushima comes up short on this end as well, which is, I guess, a bit more subjective. Some will feel like this open world really immersed them, right? And I can't take that away from people. But I challenge them to explain why. Is it because of the presentation? Because, I mean, it is really, really, really good. But that's just a visual aspect. It feels like a game world through and through. Something that wouldn't be a problem if it hit one of the other 2 criteria as I mentioned before, but since it doesn't, I feel like it really needed to rely on selling a setting and make me feel like I'm really in it, and it just doesn't do that for me, because most of the objectives are copy and paste, go here and collect something, or go here and clear out a camp, or you just got nothing else, really. There's no trading system at all. You just collect basic resources and upgrade your stuff. There's no mini games, which I get is set during a very tragic time in Japanese history, but at the same time, like, you could have tried to incorporate some sort of like archery minigame or horse racing minigame, even goddamn Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time on the N64 4 has horse racing, and you could have put that in any way, shape, or form. Tie some of the vanity gear to that instead of making it all flippin' other sword shrines or fox dens. Like, sure, visually these things are different. Functionally, you're doing the same thing for more than half the game if you decide to delve into the open world aspect of it. You can't interact with the villagers in any meaningful way outside of talking to them to get information on more copy and paste objectives. What if you tied some of the techniques that you learn throughout the game, which we'll get more to during the gameplay section, to sword masters who you train under instead of it being just random Mongols you kill and then just magically Jin knows a new sword style. Like, this type of design worked in Infamous because in Infamous you're practically Thunder God. In Tsushima, you're supposed to feel like a lonely samurai up against the world, but the world is just a collection of copy and paste objectives that get very boring pretty fast. Here's a list of activities of things you can do in Tsushima. You can ride to a sword shrine and collect something. You can go to a high Q spot, pick 3 arbitrary choices, and collect something. Go to a shrine, climb a very restrictive and set path for you and get something. Or, get this, with the fox dens, instead of just going there and getting a thing, you go there, you follow a fox, which you can't miss, then you get the thing. There's like no actual gameplay tied to any of this. It's smoke and mirrors. The only way you can fail like any of the objectives is like if for some reason the climbing controls just don't work, which has happened to me for some reason. Just Jin doesn't want to grab onto whatever thing I jumped to, and then he's like, oh no, now I'm dead. Or you're kind of dumb like me and you get distracted easily and occasionally lose sight of a fox. Other than that, there's strongholds. They're strongholds like any other fucking open world game. I won't comment too much on the actual side quests in the game, other than I don't really remember any of them, except for like one where I guess I followed a doctor to help him cure somebody, and along the way we ended up taking on another patient, and by the time we got to where we were originally going, the person we were supposed to help died. That was kind of sad. But other than that, like, these side quests were just pretty forgettable, and I'll admit, I've been a bit spoiled by the Yakuza games, because that game does side quests better than 90% of games. But like, this very much felt like a Ubisoft open world game with Ubisoft type side missions where even when they're trying to be a bit more interesting, they still end up being pretty formulaic. The sad truth is that I actually remember a couple of side quests from Odyssey more than I do remember side quests from this game. And I even remember one side quest from Valhalla, and I haven't even played that game, I just watched a friend play that. Sure, is that a completely subjective basis to form my argument around? Yes, but what video on the internet isn't subjective? This is why I don't care too much about the whole wind mechanic and how the map reveals itself as you go through it. Like, yeah, it's aesthetically cool and all, but no amount of obscuring the map or making the GPS wind will change the fact that there is nothing interesting to find or do in this world. Only incentive is to power up and get stuff, that's it. Which I won't lie, I do enjoy the fact that there is some sort of immediate award associated with everything. But really beyond that, there's no reason to do anything that isn't the main quest. About the only other thing is like character-specific side quests, but I'd argue they're just as important as the main story because they give a lot of context to it. And then the only other thing is the Mystic Tales, which were kind of cooler. They were a lot more thematic, a lot more interesting. I like those. But really, that's it. Despite being smaller than most Ubisoft games, it was just as repetitive. I have to break the combat into two elements. the swordplay, and everything else. Reason I do this is because if we were only talking about the swordplay, there's nothing really negative to say. It's solid. You got 4 styles and each correlates to a different enemy type. Granted, you don't have to specifically use that sword type to defeat them. It's just more about evening the playing field. And if we were talking about overall difficulty when just engaging with the swordplay and the swordplay alone, it's at a level that's just right. It's not too hard to the point where enemies can just steamroll you, but not so easy to the point where you can just put no thought into it. If the sword combat was the only form of combat in this game, I wouldn't even really have a segment here, but then we got the other aspects of combat, the archery, the stealth, and the ghost tools. And honestly, these systems are either underwhelming or break most of the game. Let's start with archery. It's very, very basic. Just about the only thing you can do interesting with these archery mechanics is slow down time, which really just equates to helping you get better headshots. I also think it's kind of redundant to allow you to upgrade the bow when even the base bow can kill every enemy with a headshot. And because of the slow motion mechanic, really it's almost impossible to miss them. But like at some point early on, you start encountering enemies with helmets on their head that you can't just simply headshot, and you start thinking, oh, this is the reason I need to upgrade my bow. But then you just get a heavy bow that could pierce through the helmet and headshot them anyway. So really, upgrading your bow is absolutely pointless in this game, and I don't know why you can. But the only other things you got are fire and explosive arrows, which functionally act more just like extra ninja tools anyways. Just about the only other thing you can do is shoot certain things in the environment, like beehives and lamps, to get a bit of an edge in combat, but these are so contextual in their placement that really they don't flow naturally into combat. And chances are, because of that, you'll forget about them more than half the time they are available as an option in combat. Stealth is a joke, like a straight up joke. Hiding in bushes and killing people from behind is a weak-ass stealth system made all the weaker by the fact that every open world game has done it since Far Cry 3. This isn't stealth, it's barely hide and go fucking seek. It doesn't help that enemies are as dumb as dog shit when it comes to searching and noticing you. Combine that with charms and armor that up your stealth, and by up your stealth just make it so that enemies take longer to see you, combined with a charm in particular that makes your wind chimes poisonous, and of course I'm going to spam the absolute shit out of that, especially considering that wind chimes are easy to find in just about every camp. Oh, let's not forget that arrows are technically a stealth tool as well, so you can really just sit in the back most of the time and headshot enemies without being seen. And here's the thing. As a side mechanic that helps you thin out camps, it's fine. Basic, but fine. But then the game forces you into a ton of stealth missions, and you know the ones I'm talking about, right? The ones where if you're even seen, it's an instant failure. Listen, if you aren't actually going to develop good or deep stealth mechanics, don't design stealth missions. It's simple. I get you wanted to have variety in your mission design, but these levels are just annoying. Mainly because of the lack of deeper stealth mechanics, each mission just revolves around finding the specific path they laid out for you and following that. Listen, guys, stealth in games needs to be more than just hiding in bushes, following specific paths, and being able to throw the occasional distraction. It's a combination of AI behavior, being able to manipulate the environment, and create your own path to the objective. When done well, stealth is actually a platform for tons of creativity. But most importantly, and I really need every game developer to listen to this, stealth games are more than just failing you the second you screw up. I mean, fuck, there's a reason why actual stealth games refrain from making most missions instantly fail you the second you are seen. Because in actual stealth games, there's an element of being able to hide again and trick the AI and use your own smarts to get out of a sticky situation. And this is probably where I get the defense of, well, this isn't a full-on stealth game, so why are you criticizing it? That's my point exactly. I'm tired of games that aren't stealth games adding in cheap-ass stealth mechanics as an illusion to variety. The stealth mechanics are bare bones and not refined enough to be at all interesting, and yet the game designs half of its fucking missions around it. Because most of the time, and I would argue in this case as well, it just leads to really dumb AI, because that AI has to be designed to accommodate all these different mechanics that aren't fully fleshed. The archery is basic, the stealth is even more basic, and when you have to design enemies that allow you to effectively use those basic ass playstyles, it doesn't matter how proficient they are during the sword combat, it makes them easily fucking breakable overall. This brings me to the ghost tools, which are also completely fucking broken. To be fair, not at first, because you only have such a limited supply of them. But honestly, it's not hard to just go out and hunt a couple predator skins and then upgrade your supplies and then just have so many of these ninja tools that you can trivialize the absolute shit out of combat. The second things even slightly get tense, you can throw one of them out and instantly be out of trouble. And I think the main problem here is there's no counters to them, no way to misuse them unless you're being completely careless, no way for them to backfire on you, they're just all free kill opportunities. And that's another thing, they don't even really there's really not that much of a difference between using the kunai versus using the bomb other than the animation behind it. They both just have the same benefits, essentially. There was no thought put behind when and where you can or should be able to use these tools. At least none other than the base idea that they're meant for crowd control. And I just wish the crowd fought back a little bit more and made using these tools a bit more of an interesting choice. Like, why can't shield guys block my kunais? Why can't their bomb guys throw mine back? Why do I have no friends? These are the questions I am asking while I spam ghost tools. And I know these seem like very minute things, but they really would have helped make the overall combat feel more dynamic, instead of all the dynamic elements playing out in sword combat. Maybe if the game had some sort of incentive system to discourage you from spamming ghost tools or stealth or archery, that would make more sense, right? But nothing like that is in the game whatsoever, so you have no reason not to spam these tools and abilities and completely trivialize combat outside of your own sense of enjoyment, and that becomes a make your own fun argument. It just felt like they wanted all these elements for the sake of variety, but they clearly only really cared about the sword combat. This is probably why the boss fights take away all those abilities and force you into one-on-one sword duels, which on one hand is awesome from a thematic standpoint, and I mean, I guess it's the game being self-aware enough to play to its strengths, but for me, a boss should be a test of all your skills, not just one specific set of them. Taking away more than half of my gameplay options feels like a lazy way of making the game harder, as opposed to making a boss that can counter my ghost tools and turn it against me if I'm careless about it. And had these not been the only types of boss fights, it probably wouldn't annoy me so much, but they are, except for like one exception. I think it just really goes to show how little they put into the other mechanics. And honestly, the thing is, again, these elements only exist because the game's open world, and open world games nowadays have to have this sense of freedom of how you go about playing the game. But again, these mechanics are weak, and I would argue that had the game not been open world and had cut out these mechanics and just focused everything on good mission design and the sword combat, this game would have been a whole lot better. This just leaves the story. Ghost of Tsushima is set during the Mongol invasion, and that's actually an event that happened in history, but that's more of a backdrop for the actual story of the game. The real story is about Jin Sakai, and I'm sorry in advance if I butcher that name or any of the other character names. I can barely speak my own native language see, point taken! Point taken! I can barely speak English properly! And you're gonna expect me to properly pronounce Japanese names with accuracy, please. Oh yeah, back to the point. The story is about Jin Sakai, a samurai who is forced to throw away his notions of honor to save his home. And for the most part, this story is effectively told. Its first 2 acts are strong, doing a good job at introducing the characters, making you learn who they are and what they fight for. The whole time this is happening, you are being asked the question what honor means and what are the consequences of abandoning it, even for a greater good. When it comes to setting up those themes, I think it does a really good job. When it comes to driving them home, that's another story. And for me, everything starts to go downhill near the end of Act 2. It leads, honestly, to an underwhelming Act 3 that feels rushed, all for a conclusion that doesn't fully earn the emotions it wants you to feel. But let's start with where the story really starts to lose me, and that's Taka's death. Now, the death itself is not the problem here. It was kind of needed, I understood why it happened, and it was a sad death. But I have 2 problems with it. The first one is the circumstances behind it. I mean, Jin getting captured feels contrived. Getting snuck up on a single Ronin at a point in the story where he not only knows he can't trust them, but the dirty tactics that they use. He just lets one of them super easily jump him mid-conversation with Ryozu. And then he also, like, conveniently breaks out after Taka's death because, like, that doesn't feel contrived either. Like, if Yuna broke him out of his restraints, that would have made sense. But he just magically breaks out of his restraints just after the fact for whatever reason. But honestly, that's a minor complaint compared to the other problem I have, and that's the lack of conflict it causes between Jin and Yuna. I'm sorry, this game builds up Yuna as doing everything her whole life for her and Taka. But Taka dies and she just simply forgives Jin, even though Jin let Taka help, knowing how Yuna feels, knowing Taka's lack of skill. Yeah, he didn't personally behead Taka, but he was fully aware of the risk he was putting him in, and he does shoulder some of the responsibility. Why spend all this time setting up her character around caring about nothing but her and her brother's safety, and the second her brother dies, she just quickly gets over it? Because here's the other thing. It's not just that she shows no anger towards Jin. She just becomes very much a non-character after this point in the story. Like, her whole story arc just kind of ends with Taka dying. Like, what does she really do, or what purpose does she really serve in the story after that fact, other than being a convenient plot device to get Jin out of danger occasionally? And here's the thing, they didn't necessarily need to explore it by having her blame Jin, but they should have done something greater with her character after Taka's death. Really show the impact of her losing the most important person in her life. But no, why do that when we can have like a pseudo-romance between her and Jin? Like, why not show her become unhinged? Why not show her crossing lines that are even too far for Jin? Just something to show that Taka's death had a meaningful impact on her. In fact, Act 3 as a whole just feels rushed. And not just because of the lack of meaningful payoff with Yuna's story arc, but it's also the lack of meaningful payoff when it comes to ending the Mongols and driving home the game's themes. With the Mongols, by this point you have mostly driven them back, so there's like 3 missions once Act 3 starts, and then you are fighting the Khan. Now, if the idea here was to focus more on the morality of Jin's actions, like the story had been mainly focusing on up to this point, then fine, I actually looked past this. Again, I never saw the Khan and stopping the Mongols as the main story of this game. It's just the catalyst, if you will, to set Jin forth on this adventure. Jin abandoning his code and the good and bad that comes with that, that's the real story here, right? One that leads to a final battle with his uncle Shimura, the man who raised him, who is now trying to kill him because of his belief in the importance of that code. As a samurai, you're supposed to be seen as a paragon of justice and order, and an example for all citizens to follow. It's his duty to uphold that code, even when it leads to unnecessary death. Now, up until Act 3, the story did a lot to justify Jin's actions as the Ghost. You see how the Mongols brutalize his people, how the chaos from their arrival is being used by those with more selfish goals, how they turn your own people against you. how they try to turn you against your own people, and the coldness coming from the Khan as he justifies all of this. By Act 3, you want to see the Khan die, and you want to see him die by any means necessary. Act 3 needed to justify Shimura's perspective. We really needed to see the negatives of becoming the ghost, why the samurai code mattered in the first place, and to be fair, they try to do this, but they fail. One, because of that lack of conflict with Yuna. I know, I'm probably getting annoying with this, but like, listen, I really think given the theme here, there would have been something poetic about the person who saved and encouraged Jin to become the ghost, took that philosophy so far that it led to her and Jin fighting. Really show how his actions can lead to things getting out of hand. Especially when it's adopted by somebody who never lived their life by a code of honor to begin with. But secondly, their main method of communicating the negatives of Jin's actions are to just simply have you overhear conversations other people are having. Conversations about how Japanese business partners are poisoning each other with what they learned from Jin, and about how the bandits are more of a problem now, and literally during the last mission of the game, it throws out this concept of a ghost army that is formed under Jin's nose. But the thing is, we don't get to see any of that, and it just makes none of it hold weight. But then at the end, the game asks you to feel sad for two loved ones fighting each other over their opposing points of view, urging you to understand where both sides are coming from. And sure, on the sentimental side of family fighting each other, that's sad. But I'm a suck, and I'll always get sad at shit like that. Like, you really don't even have to set that up well, it will just make me sad. On a deeper level, it really does nothing for me. Because all I'm thinking is, this wouldn't be happening if Shimura wasn't such a fucking dinosaur. The fight itself is not the problem here because it was inevitable. We all saw it coming. The game had kind of clearly been building up to this point. But when it came time to justify both characters' beliefs, the game just cheaps out. The only other thing I can think of that this game does to try to convince you that Jin may be taking things too far is the Mongols get a hold of the poison you had been using on them, and threaten to take it to mainland Japan unless you can stop them. What the game tries to implicate here is that they wouldn't be poisoning each other had the ghost never introduced the poison to begin with, which is technically true, but ignores the fact that they've been showing the Mongols brutalizing people all game. Oh, they got poison now. So? We really gotta give Jin shit because the Mongols learned one trick off of him, and are going to use it on mainland Japan. They were going to invade there anyways, and slaughter tons of people violently without the poison. All Jin did was accidentally give them an idea, something he corrects immediately by finishing the Khan before they can enact their plan. So ultimately, how am I supposed to feel bad? Jin was 100% justified. His ways saved people. Shimura's got them killed. Jin drove back the Mongols. Shimura at best helped, and at worst got in his way. And any consequences of Jin's tactics are told to us and never shown. Meanwhile, we see plenty of samurai murdered following Shimura's code of honor, and the closest the game gets to justifying other viewpoints is through Ishikawa, Misako, and Norio's side quests. So let's talk about those for a moment, because some of them do a great job at helping solidify the game's themes. Others, I think, fall flat, as each three tries to be essentially a parallel to one of the three main characters. Ishikawa, the sensei whose student has gone astray and now must end her. Misako, the woman who cares about her family over all else, a family that is taken from her. And Norio, a warrior trying to live up to the legacy of his family name, who witnesses the loss of many comrades and starts to rethink the codes he's lived his life under to this point. Norio's, I think, is the best executed. You learn his story about how him and his brother Enjo, along with a bunch of other monks, were held in a pit and executed one by one, how only he survived and seeks to help what other monks are left. He eventually is met with his brother, who, as well as you can see, he didn't have a tea party with the Mongols, that's for sure. Unlike Jin, who got to save his family / mentor, Norio is faced with the brutalized remains of his. It makes sense he snaps, burns down the village, crosses the line. It's like this could easily have been Jin had he not saved Shimura. Misako's is a little iffy because I feel like if Yuna got a fuller story arc, this would have been a great parallel. You get the part where you see the difference between one who has lost their family and the other who still has them, but not seeing the difference in how they handle loss sells it short. Which sucks because on its own, Misako's story is probably my favorite side quest in this entire game. It's probably just my favorite part of this entire game. God damn, I love Misako. I guess if there's any parallel to take out of it at this point is that Misako becomes unhinged and Yuna doesn't. But even Misako's quest ends with her letting go of that anger and moving on. So they both kind of just end up in the same spot. But of course, Ishikawa, the character whose story is meant to help justify Shimura's beliefs, ends on a note that completely undermines it. As Tomo, Ishikawa's apprentice who you've been hunting with him this whole side quest, she gets to ride off into the distance scot-free of what she did. And yet the game wants to try to make you think about the consequences of your actions when a character who did far worse gets off with none. For reference, Jin started stealth killing Mongols and using poison on them to protect his home. Tomo joined up with them and started attacking many Japanese citizens simply to save her own ass. Even when she did the right thing, it was for very selfish reasons. Now, I will say that I get what they were trying to do here, and there is a sense of poetry behind Ishikawa letting her go after all the harm she caused, but Shimura not forgiving Jin for becoming the ghost to save his own people. But in terms of showing us the consequences of not living your life by a code, it falls flat. So ultimately, when I get to this ending, even though the music and the cutscene are selling the tone, even though I know the meaning of this ending, it doesn't land. Because only one side here is actually right, and it's clear as day who it is. It's Jin. He saved Tsushima. Even the personal consequence of having to lose his own uncle to become the ghost comes down to an arbitrary choice. And hell, I know they weren't trying to make another Infamous, but I kind of think the story would have worked better if it worked like Infamous and the endings were dictated on your playstyle and the path you chose throughout the entirety of the game. At least then I would have forgiven some of the weak execution in driving these themes home, because at least it would have been my choice throughout the entirety of the game, not just some arbitrary bullshit one that's presented to me at the very end. But I'm going to end it there. I think I've said everything I need to say. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe and comment and like and all the other stuff that comes with YouTube. Check out some of my other content. I am doing a horror stream every Sunday. Right now we are playing Siren, so hopefully you'll join that too. I'm gonna go play in some traffic now, so I'll see you all later.